I had just turned 18 when I went back to that duplex in the Columbus suburbs, and the living room had been cleared out. All that's left on the kitchen counter is a sticky note. You'll figure it out. The ones who left these words were my dad, my mom, and my older brother. The price was that my lease was canceled early, I had only 7 days left to move out, and less than $400 in my bank account. I wasn't reborn, and no one came to save me. My chance to fight back began that day, by keeping every piece of paper, every email, and every bill they left me. My first step wasn't to go crying to them, but to call the landlord and ask for a written record. I need to prove one thing first. I didn't run away from home. They deleted me from it. The landlord stood in the empty doorway and handed me the early lease termination notice, looking even more embarrassed than my parents. He said they had already taken the deposit, and the house must be cleared out by next Monday. I crouched in the empty kitchen and pressed the sticky note into an old folder. In that moment, I knew this piece of paper would no longer be a wound, but only evidence. I searched the bedroom from top to bottom. All that was left was a cracked suitcase and 2 old coats. Even the hangers in the wardrobe were gone. They hadn't just left for a while, they had planned it so I couldn't chase after them. I called Mom and it went straight to voicemail. I texted Dad and the bubble stayed green. My brother's social media account was still online, but he didn't reply with a single word. That night, I sat on the duplex porch, deleting my contacts one by one. It wasn't because I wasn't in pain, but because I finally saw clearly that they had long since treated me as a burden to be dealt with. For the first 3 nights, I crashed on the couch at Rachel's place, a girl I met through work. When she handed me a blanket, she didn't ask too many questions, and that was worth more than all the tenderness my family had ever given me. On the 4th day, I couldn't keep being a burden to her, so I used my last $86 to rent a storage unit. When the rolling shutter came down, I understood for the first time what it means to have no way out in the city. I shoved my suitcase into the corner and checked the YMCA opening hours on my phone with the brightness turned all the way down. To shower, you have to scan a temporary day pass, and every time I pretend I only came to work out. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner all became a jar of peanut butter and a plastic spoon. The convenience store cashier asked if I wanted a bag, and I shook my head because even those 10 cents had to be saved. During the day, I sat at a computer at the Columbus Metropolitan Library, sending out resumes. The screen was filled with rejection letters. With no stable address, no car, and no one to vouch for me, even the interviews felt like something I had borrowed. The first person willing to hire me was the night shift manager at a 24-hour diner. After reading my crumpled application form, she asked only one question: could I arrive on time? When I nodded, I was still clutching the damp YMCA towel in my hand. She tossed me an apron. The pay wasn't high, but it was enough to help me get up off the floor first. At a 3 a.m. diner, truck drivers drink black coffee and a drunk sleeps in a booth. I carried plates until my wrists went numb, but every tip went into the envelope. Once I nearly fainted in the back kitchen, but the manager didn't scold me. He just pushed open the door to the staff break room. She said, "Sleep for 20 minutes. Don't die in my shop." After I woke up, I didn't spend long saying thank you. I just stuck the shift schedule into the folder. Because I know, those who saved me must be remembered, and the same goes for those who hurt me. I bought my first prepaid phone and only used the number for work and job applications. For the family section, I left it blank for the first time. Every payday, I spread the cash on the floor of the storage unit and divided into 3 piles: rent, food, getting out of here. My way of fighting back was never to win an argument with them, but to last longer than they thought I would. The real turning point was a man in a suit who often came to the diner. He saw me calculating tax tables on the back of a bill, handed me a business card, and said their office needed a temporary document assistant. The next day, I wore the black pants I bought at a thrift store, standing in front of an office building in downtown Columbus. That temp job paid 3 times the hourly wage at the diner, and I was in no position to hesitate. In the office basement archive room, I filed boxes of old contracts by year. Others found it boring, but to me it felt like grabbing a lifeline because I had finally encountered the real rules of business. I learned to read invoices, organize expense reports, and track overdue payments. The dirty work those companies looked down on became the blueprint for how I made money later. 3 months later, my supervisor sent me a spreadsheet and said the client information was a mess. By the end of the workday, I had marked the wrong entries in red and circled the duplicate payments. For the first time, he looked at me seriously. That red-marked table earned me a second office recommendation. My name slowly went from the temp worker list to someone people would CC on emails. The day I moved out of the storage unit, I could only afford to rent a basement studio. There are mold spots in the corner and the window faces the parking lot, but I paid for the door lock myself. I wiped the kitchen counter clean and placed the photocopy of that note on it. It wasn't to miss them, but to remind myself. They told me to figure it out on my own, so I really wanted to show them. At 23, I started taking on freelance operations projects. By day, they clean up workflows for small companies. At night, they use an old laptop to learn QuickBooks, Excel macros, and contract pricing. The first old laptop was bought on Facebook Marketplace, and its case was scratched. The battery only lasts half an hour. But for the first time, it means I don't have to beg anyone for a desk. At 25, I rented the cheapest hot desk in a co-working space. My business card read Emma Walker Consulting. It was just me, but clients thought I had a team. The first major client kept delaying payment. I send the late fee notice and small claims court templates directly. They transferred the money that same day, and in that moment I learned that boundaries can make money too. At 27, I had 5 contractors, and my office moved into an old building in downtown Columbus. I didn't throw away the folding table by the window. I left it standing against the wall to remind myself not to pretend I'd forgotten. At 29, my net worth on the banking app exceeded 7 figures for the first time. Not an influencer screenshot, not borrowed respectability. It means cash, retirement accounts, no debt, and health insurance you can pay for yourself. I didn't open the champagne, I just sat on the apartment floor staring at the balance. Because this money wasn't luck, it was the life I dug out from under that note, $1 at a time. All these years, my family has never once looked for me. My older brother's name would occasionally appear in suggested friends, his profile picture showing wedding rings and a suburban lawn, as if he had never had a younger sister. I didn't click into it, and I didn't send any messages. My judgment is simple. When a grown man hasn't cared whether you lived or died for over 10 years, and then suddenly shows up, it's probably not because of love. I started going to therapy so I wouldn't become the kind of person they were. There was a box of tissues in Melissa's office, but she never urged me to forgive. She only asked how I wanted to protect myself. I wrote down in my notebook the people who had saved me. Rachel, the diner manager, the librarian, and the client who gave me my first temp job. That page felt more like home than any family photo album. Last week, I was on a podcast about family estrangement. In the recording studio, the host asked me who I hated most, and I just slapped that note onto the table. 4 days after the show went online, views surged to 1.3 million. My inbox was flooded with thank yous from strangers, saying I had spoken the words they didn't dare to say. I thought that once the podcast blew up, the first thing to arrive would be ad contracts, but instead, at 2 in the morning, an email from Karen Walker pops up in the inbox. There is only one theme: you're still our daughter. But the actual message was as cold as a legal template. Mom said she'd seen the show and hoped I wouldn't air our so-called family misunderstanding to all of America. I sat at the dining table in a high-rise apartment in Columbus and printed out the email. There was not a single "I'm sorry" on the paper. Only "we're suffering too and you should understand your parents." My judgment changed on the spot. This wasn't Mom missing me, it was them realizing I had a voice now, so they came first to seize control of the narrative. 10 minutes later, the second email came in and the sender was my older brother. Unlike Mom, he wrote right at the beginning, "Emma, I may have been terribly wrong all these years." I stared at the screen and didn't reply. Someone who hadn't cared whether I was alive or dead for more than 10 years suddenly admitted he was wrong. There had to be someone behind him urging him to open the door. Michael sent an old photo of us as kids standing at the entrance to the Ohio State Fair. In the photo, he smiled so naturally, but by that year I had already learned to stay silent on an empty stomach. In the email, he said that back then Mom and Dad told him I was the one who left home, refused to stay in touch, and even stole the family savings account. I took a screenshot of that line of text and saved it in the evidence folder, because all they left me back then was a sticky note that said "you'll figure it out" and an emptied out fridge. The next day, in the therapy office, Melissa placed that email on the coffee table. She didn't speak for anyone, she only asked me, "If you see him, what are you going to protect?" I looked at that line in my notebook. Don't lend money, don't sign anything, and don't help them cover up their lies. My counterattack wasn't about winning the argument, it was about locking in the rules first. I sent Michael a short email back, arranging to meet only him. The location is set at a glass-walled cafe in downtown Chicago, and everyone pays for themselves. I didn't choose Columbus, and I didn't go to his house. My judgment is simple. Someone who truly wants to apologize will respect boundaries. Someone who wants to control me will see boundaries as a nuisance. On Friday afternoon, I sat by the window in a cafe with only a cup of black coffee and a recording reminder sticker on the table. This is Illinois, and in public I'm not going to make him change his story. Michael came in wearing a wrinkled shirt, clutching his phone in his hand. The first thing he said was not to ask how I had survived all these years, but Mom cried all night. I didn't take his emotional bait. I just pushed the photo of that note onto the table. My voice was steady. When she cried, did she ever mention this? Michael's face suddenly stiffened. He stared at the photo for a long time, as if realizing for the first time that the piece of paper wasn't a prop I had made up. He said Mom and Dad always said I was too sensitive, that once I became an adult I threw tantrums, moved out on my own, and refused to answer their calls. I opened the landlord's termination email from back then and showed it to him. The date, address, and early move-out notice were all there, only my name had been singled out and dumped at the back of the lease. Michael's finger paused at the edge of the screen. Finally he said softly, "They never showed me this." I didn't take the chance to cry and complain. I just kept asking, "So you came today to apologize, or to ask me to go back and see them?" He was silent for a few seconds, and the answer was revealed. He said Mom and Dad are getting older, the bills have been really heavy lately, and he hopes the whole family can sit down and figure this out. Hearing that word, I almost laughed out loud. Back then, they used those words to push me out onto the street. Now they want to use the same words to put my account on the table. I asked more directly, how much are they short? Michael looked up at me, his eyes darted away for a moment, and he finally said it might be $28,000 just to cover the emergency. Outside the cafe window, the traffic shone brightly, but the air at the table grew cold. I finally understood that what we call missing them is just them knocking on my door in another way. Michael added that Dad was being chased by medical bills and rent, and Mom's blood pressure hasn't been good lately. They didn't want me to worry. I put down the cup and stared at him. Then why didn't the first email say you missed me, and the second one only said bills? Michael was stumped by the question. He rubbed the spot between his brows and said he was just caught in the middle, not knowing who to believe. I gave him one last chance. You were 21 back then, not a child. You weren't tied up, you just chose to believe the version that was easiest for you. The words hit him in the face. He didn't argue, just flipped his phone over and placed it face down on the table. In that moment, I saw the guilt that came too late, but I was no longer willing to pay for it. After I got back to Columbus, I didn't call my parents. I only put the cafe receipts, email screenshots, and landlord records into the same encrypted folder. At 8 o'clock that night, Mom's call finally came in. Karen's name lit up on the screen. I turned on the recording prompt, then pressed answer. Her first words were still a performance for the audience. "Emma, we just miss our daughter." The voice was so soft, as if that note had never existed. I didn't beat around the bush with her and asked directly, "Why didn't you tell me your new address the day you moved away?" The other end of the line went quiet for 2 seconds. Mom said, "You've always been very independent. We thought you could handle it." That sentence was far more useful than an apology. She admitted it herself. They knew I had been left behind, and they knew I could only survive on my own. I continued to ask, "Then why did you tell Michael the first stole money and ran away from home?" Her low breathing came through the phone. Then she said, "Don't attack me like this." I didn't raise the volume, I only changed the recording file name to Karen_admission. My goal for fighting back was clear. From now on, every lie they told would have matching evidence. After she hung up the phone, Dad's email came in almost at the same time. Richard's tone was more direct than Mom's, starting with, "Family helps family." Attached below the email are 3 photos: an overdue rent notice, a clinic bill, and a credit card collection notice. The total comes to $31,600, not including interest. He didn't ask how I had survived all these years since the storage unit. He only asked if I could transfer $10,000 first. Everything else could be discussed slowly later. I stared at that email, finally certain my parents weren't trying to repair our relationship. They had seen my net worth pass 7 figures. They want to treat their daughter like an emergency fund. The next day, I was signing contracts as usual during a company video meeting, but an unknown number kept popping up in the corner of the screen. Every tremor reminds me that they already see the boundary as a provocation. I had assistants send all unknown calls to voicemail and automatically archive family-related emails. My life is not an open office they can barge into whenever they want. That afternoon, Michael sent another long email. He said Mom couldn't sleep all night, Dad called him useless, and the family was about to be crushed by the eviction notice. I only replied with 4 boundaries: no money transfers, no loans, no co-signing, and I would not explain their lies to anyone for them. I wrote the 5th point more strongly: if they need help, you can contact a credit counselor, the hospital billing department, and a housing nonprofit. Don't contact me. Michael quickly replied with 1 word: wow. Then the second letter came in. He said I had become cold-blooded, that money had turned me into someone they no longer recognized. I looked at the line, cold-blooded, and put it on the same screen as the note from back then. I looked at the word cold-blooded and didn't curse back. My first move to fight back was to gather Michael's emails, Dad's bills, and Mom's call recordings, drag them all into the same evidence folder. The next morning, the front desk of my high-rise apartment called. The doorman said a middle-aged couple drove over from Ohio, insisting they were my parents. I stood in the living room, still holding the coffee cup. When the surveillance feed lit up on the screen, Mom was holding a paper bag, and Dad stood behind her, looking like they had come to claim family ties or to collect a debt. The mother cried in front of the front desk camera, saying she only wanted to hug her daughter. But Dad kept staring at the elevator entrance, and I knew he was looking for a chance to get into the building. I didn't go downstairs, I only said these words to the doorman: "They are not allowed up. If they refuse to leave, call building security." I trained for 10 years. 3 minutes later, my phone started vibrating. Unknown numbers kept calling one after another. The voicemails were all my mom crying, saying I made her stand in the lobby and be laughed at. Dad's message was even more direct. "Emma, don't take things too far. If you can afford to live in a building like this, you can't let your parents sleep in the car." After listening, I saved the audio right away. It's not that I wasn't scared, but I know better. Once I go downstairs, they'll turn the hallway into a courtroom and rip my boundaries apart as proof that I'm an unfilial daughter. At 2 in the afternoon, the front desk called again. Dad put an old suitcase beside the lobby sofa and said they would wait until I was willing to meet. In the surveillance footage, Mom opened the paper bag, and inside were family photos from before the year I turned 18. She spread the photos one by one on the coffee table, showing them to residents as they passed by. I stared at that pile of photos, with nothing left in my heart but a cold sneer. She finally remembered what I looked like as a child, but forgot that when she left that duplex, all she left me was a note. I messaged the lawyer. They had already arrived at my place and were putting pressure on me in the lobby. Marcus replied quickly, "Don't make contact, don't go downstairs, and save all records." Half an hour later, Michael called. His voice tightened, and the first thing he said was, "Can you at least see them for 5 minutes?" Mom really can't hold on anymore. I asked him, is she falling apart because I rejected her, or because no one will pay her $30,000 bill? There was silence on the other end of the phone, and I knew the answer hadn't changed. In the evening, Dad started knocking on my apartment door. It turned out they had slipped into the elevator behind the delivery guy. The doorman was already rushing upstairs, but those few knocks still hammered into my bones. I stood inside the door and made no sound. Outside, Mom cried as she called my name, and Dad lowered his voice and said, "Don't embarrass us in front of your neighbors." This is their logic. 10 years ago, leaving me to fend for myself in an empty house wasn't humiliating, but now being escorted out by security is what they call losing face. I called building security and asked them to back up the hallway surveillance footage. The goal of my counterattack had changed. It wasn't to prove I wasn't cold-blooded, but to prove they were harassing me. When security arrived, Dad was still outside the door, holding up his phone and recording. He said this was a family dispute and there was no need to treat it like criminal trespass. I said through the door, "I didn't invite you in. Knock again and I'll call 911. The hallway went silent instantly, and Mom's crying stopped for half a beat. They were finally brought downstairs. 10 minutes later, Michael sent a text. "Dad says you threatened to have Mom arrested. Are you serious?" I replied to him with a screenshot from the hallway surveillance camera. In the footage, Dad's hand was still on my door, and Mom stood beside him wiping her tears like a rehearsed victim. That night, I set my phone to Do Not Disturb, but I was still woken up by a call from the hospital. The nurse at Ohio Health Riverside said Mom was brought into the ER because of chest pain. I sat on the edge of the bed, and my first reaction wasn't to soften but to verify the information. American hospitals won't make me pay the bill just because I'm her daughter, let alone make me take responsibility for her medical decisions. The nurse only said she was stable and needed observation. But 5 minutes later, Michael's text came in, "If anything happens to her, you'll carry this for the rest of your life." I looked at that line of text and finally understood why my parents had pushed him to the front. My biological parents handed him the knife, and my brother was the one who made me bleed. At 7 in the morning, Dad sent a photo of a hospital wristband. The next sentence, "Your mom may need a heart procedure. Are you still satisfied?" I didn't reply to Dad, I just forwarded the photo to Marcus. The lawyer only replied with one sentence, "A medical crisis does not create consent to contact you." I went to therapy. Melissa's office was very quiet, and she pushed the tissue box a little closer, but she did not ask me to be a daughter. I laid the hospital phone number, Dad's photo, and Michael's accusations all out on the coffee table. After reading it, Melissa said, "They're turning her physical condition into a tool to control you." Those words made my fingers go cold, but they also snapped me back to reality. Mom being sick is real, but so is the way I'm being held hostage by guilt. I asked Melissa if she really needs surgery and I don't go, would that be too harsh? She looked at me and said, "You're not her health insurance, not her emergency contact, and it certainly isn't her get-out-of-guilt-free card for abandoning you." When I left the clinic, I gave the hospital social worker my phone number. My message only says, "If they need resources, please provide billing assistance and a patient advocate. Don't list me as the payer." That same afternoon, Michael came again. He stood beside the coffee stand across from my apartment building, wearing a wrinkled shirt. It was as if they had drained him dry overnight. I didn't let him come upstairs, and only met him across a table by the street. I had a voice recorder in my bag, had sent my phone's location to Assistant, and was next to a spot where the building security could see me. Michael said at first glance, "Mom asked for you after anesthesia." I asked directly, "She asked me for you." Still asking me for money? His expression changed, his fingers tightening around the paper cup. Then he said Dad's truck payment was overdue too. The family credit card is almost maxed out. This is the ledger behind the critically ill act. Mom was in the hospital, Dad was demanding money, Michael was caught in the middle, and I was set up as the last ATM. I repeated the 4 boundaries to his face: no transfers, no signatures, no meeting parents, and no accepting surprise visits downstairs. With each point he finished, his face grew a shade paler. Michael said quietly, "You really are different from before." I nodded. Yes, the old me would have begged you not to leave me behind. Now I would call the police. As he stood up, there was guilt in his eyes, but also resentment instilled in him by his parents. I didn't chase after him. He had to choose for himself, keep being a mouthpiece, or become an adult. That night, I booked a flight to Portland. I'm not running away, I'm just temporarily breaking their blockade around my place, and I'm going to stay at Rachel's for a few days. Rachel was the one who let me sleep on the sofa in her studio apartment for 2 weeks back then. After listening to the call, she only said, "The guest room is ready, bring the files." At the airport security checkpoint, another email from Dad popped up on my phone. At the airport security checkpoint, the email had only 2 words in the subject line: defamation warning. Dad said if I mention them on the podcast again, he'll have the lawyer sue me into bankruptcy. I stared at the screen and laughed instead. I was the one whose reputation had really been ruined. The fact that he cried defamation first meant what they were hiding was dirtier than $31,000. I didn't board the flight, I just changed my ticket and went straight back to Chicago. My judgment was clear. They weren't here for money, they were afraid I'd dig up the past. At 10 at night, the building doorman called on the internal line and said there was a woman downstairs named Jenny carrying a document envelope. She kept insisting she knew the truth about me running away from home back then. I had security bring her under the lobby camera. She was Michael's wife, and the first time she met me, she didn't exchange pleasantries, she just pushed her phone toward me. On the screen is an old Facebook post. Mom took a selfie holding tissues with a caption saying I stole the family savings, was mentally unstable, and left home late at night. My fingers stopped on that photo. That day, I was clearly sitting on the kitchen floor of the empty duplex. Before them was only the sticky note that said, "You'll figure it out." Jenny pulled up the second post again. Dad wrote in the church group that they searched all the Columbus shelters. They also called the police and filed a missing person report. I made her open the comments section right there. Neighbors, church friends, and distant relatives were all cursing me, saying I had put my poor parents through endless suffering. The price was finally laid out before me. It wasn't that no one knew I had disappeared, it was that they had trained everyone to believe only that I was guilty. Jenny sat at the dining table in my apartment, her hand pressed down on the document envelope. She said Michael had only found out in the past few years that the so-called savings simply didn't exist. I put the voice recorder on the table and asked if she was willing to start from the beginning. Before she nodded, she glanced at the doorway as if afraid those parents would burst in at any moment. She said that in the first year after the marriage, Mom showed her a stack of my medical records. They have anxiety, impulse behavior, and theft risk written on them, and none has a clinic letterhead. When I heard this, I immediately took photos of those photocopied pages. My counterattack target had changed, not just to reject them, but to dismantle the fake victim identity they had built up for more than 10 years. Jenny took out another bank envelope. Inside was Mom and Dad's lease termination from before they moved, dated exactly 6 weeks before my 18th birthday. This piece of paper was harsher than any tearful accusation. They didn't leave at the last minute. They had planned ahead to leave me in an empty house in Ohio. I sent Marcus the photos. He replies with just one line, "Keep everything. Don't confront them alone." At noon the next day, I meet Jenny at a restaurant near his office. She walked in wearing sunglasses, and the first thing she said was, They called Michael 47 times last night. She puts her phone on the table and the voicemail plays automatically. Mom cried and said I had brainwashed Jenny, while Dad scolded her for destroying the family and even threatened to contact her company's HR. I looked at that string of missed calls and finally understood their strategy. They used a critical illness against me, guilt against Michael, and reputation and work against Jenny. Jenny said in a low voice that the so-called medical crisis in Michael's family had also been exaggerated. The hospital bills are real, but most of them have already been put on a payment plan. She opened another spreadsheet. What really maxed out were Mom and Dad's own credit cards, Home Depot, Costco, casino hotels. The total added up to more than $80,000. I stared at the line that said casino resort charge. The last bit of hesitation in my heart was gone. They used Mom's surgery as a cover, but really, they wanted me to plug the hole from their spending. When Marcus arrived at the restaurant, his suit jacket was still draped over his arm. After looking at the screenshot, he only said this was not a family misunderstanding, but long-term defamation and harassment. I forwarded Dad's defamation warning to him. Marcus immediately looked up. Truth is a defense. If they want to attack that phrase, they first have to prove what you said was false. Those words were like a key. I was no longer the daughter who had to prove her innocence. I have screenshots, the lease, recordings, and their own emails. In the afternoon, a new email from Dad popped up in my inbox. He said if I kept stirring Jenny up, they would expose to the media my history of stealing money, lying, and mental instability. I tossed the email into the middle of the dining table, and Jenny's face instantly went pale. She said this was how they used to scare Michael, always saying it was to protect the family name. I didn't reply to Dad, I just forwarded the email to Marcus. My rule is simple. For every extra threat the villain writes, I add one more page to my evidence folder. Marcus quickly sent a lawyer's letter. There was no emotion in it, only a demand. Stop contacting us, preserve all electronic records, and withdraw the false allegations, or we will proceed with a civil claim. For the first time, Dad stayed silent for a full 3 hours. Then Mom made a new post on Facebook saying that some children, after becoming successful, humiliate their sick parents. When I took the screenshot, someone in the comments had already asked, is your daughter Emma Walker from that podcast? They tried to play the victim but ended up putting my name in front of even more people. Jenny looked at the comments section and suddenly said she had another account. That was the private church group her mom had pulled her into, and it hid even earlier posts. After she logged in, the page loaded more than a dozen old records. Every year on my birthday, Mom posts a photo of candles, saying, I hope my lost daughter comes home. I looked at those fake birthday candles and my stomach sank. She doesn't miss me, she's using my disappearance to keep up her image as a good mother. Even worse was a fundraising link. Dad had once raised money in the name of finding his daughter and paying for her treatment, with a goal of $15,000. We actually received $9,300. I zoomed in on the page and the diner owner's name was on the donation list. The person who put me on the night shift back then may still think I stole money and ran away from home. I didn't cry, I just saved the fundraising page as a PDF. My next step was clear. Find every bit of sympathy and cash they had gotten by using me. Only then did Jenny say what she feared most. Her adult daughter Lily studies art at a community college. Recently, a strange account followed all of my works. I told her to open the account. The profile picture was blank, but the like history was all from the church page in my parents' town and my mom's public posts. This isn't random harassment. They've started going around me and targeting Jenny's family. When my bottom line was crossed for the third time, calling the police and hiring a lawyer were no longer enough. I texted Michael, writing only one sentence. If you still want to protect your own home, come to my apartment now and bring all the documents you're afraid to look at. Half an hour later, Michael stood at my door holding an old storage box. On the box was Dad's handwriting, Emma problem. When I saw those two words, my heart didn't ache, it just went cold. It turns out that in their family, I wasn't a daughter, but a problem to be filed away, smeared, and cashed in on at any time. Michael set the box on the dining table, looking completely drained. He said he used to believe his parents because they made every piece of so-called evidence look real. Michael opened that old box, and on top wasn't a photo of me, but a stack of printed Facebook posts. Every page painted me as the bad daughter who stole money, lost control, and disappeared by choice. I didn't break down at the dining table, I just sent the photos to the lawyer. My judgment is simple. They spent 12 years building a lie, and now every piece of paper can become evidence. At noon the next day, Marcus came with me to meet Michael and Jenny at a diner near his office. We sat in a window-side booth, the coffee untouched, with the recorder set on the table first. When Jenny took off her coat, I saw a ring of dark bruises on her arm. She instinctively pulled her sleeve back, but that one moment was enough. Her parents' control began to move from words to hands. I stared at the bruise and asked, "Who did this?" Jenny didn't cover for them. She only said Dad grabbed her and told her not to air their family matters outside and shame them. Michael's face fell instantly. He used to always say he was just caught in the middle, but at this moment he finally saw that his own family had already been dragged into the same pit. Marcus didn't comfort him. He just pushed the yellow sticky notepad over. Keys, accounts, mortgage, passwords. Write down everything they can get their hands on. Michael lowered his head and started making a list. The very first line made my heart tighten. Dad is still listed on his joint checking account and has permission to view deposits and withdrawals. The second line is even more troublesome. Back when Mom and Dad helped him get the mortgage, they acted as co-signers. The file still contained their old address and some contact permissions. Jenny put her phone on the table, and the screen showed 17 missed calls. Mom sent one every 10 minutes. You ruined this family. I did not tell them to put up with it. I said it plainly. Starting today, don't answer calls, don't reply to texts, and don't meet them alone. You're not arguing, you're gathering evidence. Marcus gave them a colleague's business card on the spot, a lawyer who handled family law and real estate. Michael clutched the business card, his hand shaking as if it had just been pulled out of the water. He finally looked up at me and said, "Emma, they raised me to fear them too." This sentence doesn't count as atonement, but at least it was the first time he stopped making excuses for himself. I didn't say I forgave him, I just pushed the napkin toward him. My goal in fighting back changed. It was no longer just to protect myself, but to cut every thread they had extended into Michael's family. That evening, Michael changed the bank password at the kitchen table. The laptop screen is glowing, the old account is locked, and the new account application page is stuck on the final step. Jenny pulls a new door lock out of the Home Depot shopping bag. She sent me a photo of the receipt for $189, and that payment was more real than any apology. The next morning, I had just started a video meeting when Jenny called, her voice completely panicked. She said only one thing: they came into our home. When I arrived at Michael's single-family house in a Columbus suburb, the front door lock cylinder had been pried crooked. On the doormat by the door, there was half of a broken piece of metal. The living room looked as if it had been turned upside down, with folders scattered across the floor and every drawer pulled open. A few framed family photos were missing from the wall, and most noticeably, Michael's laptop was gone. A note was left on the kitchen island, with only one sentence. "Family matters stay in the family. I recognize that handwriting. It's Dad's. I didn't touch that piece of paper. I only had Jenny take a close-up with her phone." The last sticky note threw me into a dead end. This one will put them in the case file. When the county sheriff's deputy arrived, his first reaction was still to frown. He looked at us and said, "If they had a key, this might just be a family dispute." I handed over the photos of the bruises on Jenny's arm, the threatening texts, and the receipt for the lawyer's letter, one by one. I kept my voice steady. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's an escalation. Deputy's expression changed, but he still said there wasn't enough evidence, and they couldn't identify the person who broke down the door based on relationships alone. I understood American police procedure is about evidence, not about how much pain we're in. After Marcus arrived, he immediately asked to file a supplemental burglary report, and included the sticky note, the door lock, and the missing equipment as property losses. This time, Deputy did not brush it off again. Michael sits on the edge of the sofa clutching an empty laptop charger. He said that computer had tax returns, mortgage documents, and records of money borrowed from his parents. I immediately realized they hadn't stolen the computer, but control. As long as they get the ledger, they can keep using the family secret to keep Michael under their thumb. Jenny found an empty document envelope on the study floor, labeled house closing documents. She crouched there without crying, only holding the document envelope out to Marcus. Marcus had Michael freeze the old account on the spot and notify the mortgage servicer to add security verification. My counterattack doesn't rely on arguing, it relies on closing every loophole one by one. In the afternoon, the locksmith changes the second deadbolt at the door. Only when the metal door lock clicked shut did Michael's shoulders relax a little. I told them not to spend the night at home. Mom and Dad had already proven they dared to come inside. Next, they might try to corner someone, and they are best at striking when no one is around to witness it. Jenny originally wanted to go to a motel, but I rejected it right away. My apartment building has a doorman, cameras, and controlled access to the underground garage. Safer than any temporary motel. Michael was about to say he didn't want to trouble me. I looked at the documents scattered all over the floor and said, "They've already brought the trouble to your home, and now it's our turn to move the battlefield somewhere I can control." Before leaving, Marcus asked us to pull up all the nearby surveillance footage. The next-door neighbor's Ring camera captured a dark Ford SUV stopping there at 10 a.m. At the same time, the camera at the corner gas station also recorded it. In the shot, Dad's car got $30 of gas, and the time on the receipt lined up perfectly. Mom and Dad thought stealing the files would let them keep controlling us, but they left behind traces on the door lock, threatening notes, vehicle routes, and card swipe times. At night, my living room was filled with suitcases. Jenny placed the medicine box and folder on the coffee table, while adult Lily sat in the corner of the sofa holding her laptop bag, without saying a word. As I poured Lily some water, she asked softly if they would come here. I didn't lie to her, I only said, they'll try, but the doors here aren't theirs to decide. Doormen sent me the visitor entry ban confirmation form. Karen and Richard's photos were added to the security system. For the first time, my apartment felt like a real safe house. Early the next morning, the safe apartment had completely turned into a temporary trench. Michael's dual-screen computer is set up in the guest room, and Jenny and adult Lily's suitcases are piled on the living room carpet. I stood in front of the dining table and redistributed the rules. No one goes downstairs alone, deliveries are left only at the front desk, and every unknown number gets screenshotted first, then sent to Marcus. Michael sat in the guest room and connected to the company VPN, but on the screen was not a report, it was a bank security page. For the first time, he completely removed Dad from the old account. Jenny spreads a stack of medical bills, mortgage letters, and old checks across the coffee table. She pointed to several Venmo notes and said, "These weren't loans, they were emergencies they made up." I took photos of those payment records and created a separate folder for them. My goal in fighting back was clear. I would no longer let them use family hardship to drag everyone into a debt trap. Adult Lily sits in the corner of the sofa with the computer screen open on her art portfolio homepage. That blank avatar was still liking posts and her finger hovered there, not daring to tap in. I didn't comfort her by saying it was okay, I just handed her the phone. "Send me the account link. Starting today, your location, social accounts, and parking information will all be reset." That afternoon, the doorman called on the intercom, saying there was a bouquet of white roses downstairs for Emma Walker. My first reaction wasn't to feel moved, but to feel my back tighten. I asked him to read the card first. There was a 2-second pause on the other end of the phone. Then he said, the card read, "We know where you all are. This isn't over." The living room suddenly fell silent. Michael's typing stopped, Jenny looked up at me, and Lily closed her laptop. It was as if that bouquet of flowers had already been placed in front of us. I had the doorman refuse it outright and asked him to save the delivery person's photo, the receipt, and the lobby surveillance footage. Mom and Dad thought they were scaring me, but they actually handed me another piece of evidence. Marcus called back 10 minutes later, his tone even steadier. He said, "Don't reply, don't make contact. Add the bouquet incident to the emergency restraining order attachment." I put the call on speaker so Michael and Jenny could both hear. Before, they could only be pushed along by their parents' emotions. This time, we let the lawyer define the boundaries. That night, what was laid out on the dining table wasn't dinner, but an evidence packet. Printed text messages, Facebook screenshots, photos of the forced entry, and the gas station surveillance timeline. One by one, they formed a long line. Michael looked at the text message that said, "We're watching you." His fingers trembled. He said in a low voice, "I used to think that if I just endured it, they would stop." I pressed that sheet of paper into the folder. The price was already laid out before him. After enduring for years, what he got in return was his home ransacked, his wife injured, and his daughter targeted. Jenny hands Marcus the photos of the bruises on her arm. She didn't cry, she only said, "This time, I won't make excuses for them anymore." Marcus marks the date and location beside it. He reminded us that county court looks at the pattern, not just one harsh threat, so every boundary crossing must be documented. In the early morning, building security sent another alert. In the underground parking garage, a car window had been smashed, and the registered license plate was Michael's. When we got to the garage, Michael's sedan was parked in the B2 corner, with the driver's side window glass shattered on the ground. A red brick is stuck by the side of the seat. Lily stands at the elevator entrance, her face pale. I stood in front of her, letting her see only the guards and the car and keeping her away from the pile of shattered glass. Michael stared at the car window, his lips pressed so tightly they had gone pale. This man finally understood. His parents were not trying to get back together. They wanted to make him afraid again. I didn't let anyone touch the car, just call 911. Reported the case numbers for vandalism, harassment, and the protective order currently being applied for. The officer who arrived first took the report as an ordinary vehicle damage case, and his tone was not urgent. Only when I handed over the bouquet card from the day before and the forced entry report did his expression change. The garage surveillance footage was quickly pulled up. In the video, a man in a baseball cap came out of the stairwell, lowered his head, and smashed the window. Avoid a full-face view the entire time. Michael looks at the screen, his throat bobbing. "That jacket, my dad has the exact same one." I told him not to rush to identify anyone and to just give the video copy to the officer. My judgment is simple. We don't rely on guesswork, we use evidence to nail them down. Back upstairs, Jenny pins the photos of the car damage onto the evidence board. She looked at the close-up of that brick and suddenly said, "The harder they smash, the closer we are to getting a protection order." That line made me want to laugh for the first time in all this chaos. Mom and Dad thought fear would drive us apart, but every threat only pushed us closer together. The next day, Marcus came to my apartment with a thick folder. He divided the evidence into 4 categories: intrusion, stalking, threats, and financial control. I turned the computer toward him and the screen showed years of Mom's Facebook posts. Those words they used to play the victim can finally prove that they have been manipulating the narrative all along. Michael took an old bank authorization form out of the guest room. Dad's name was still listed under emergency contact and account access, like a hook that hadn't been pulled out. Marcus had him sign the authorization revocation form on the spot and scheduled a call with the mortgage servicer. There were no arguments in my apartment, only control being cut off, one thing at a time. Jenny then placed Lily's phone on the table. In the location sharing list, there was actually an unfamiliar email address that looked like a family cloud account from a few years ago. Lily finally spoke. "I thought that was Michael's old email account." Her voice was very soft, but those words made everyone fall silent. I told her to immediately stop sharing, reset her Apple ID, and turn on 2-factor authentication. The hands her parents reached into her life with didn't appear out of nowhere. They had been planted there long ago. That evening, a detective from the county sheriff's office returned Marcus's call. The gas station card records matched the forced entry timeline, so the case was no longer just a family dispute. When Michael heard this, he leaned his whole body against the wall. After being controlled by his parents for half his life, he heard an outsider say for the first time, "This isn't a family matter, it's a lead in a crime." At 9 p.m., we started preparing the hearing testimony. Marcus asked everyone to only state the facts they had seen with their own eyes, not guess at motives, and not argue over who was right or wrong. Jenny sits at the dining table practicing her statement, with the torn open document envelope beside her. When she said that Dad grabbed her arm, her voice paused for a moment. I pushed the glass of water toward her. I slid the glass to Jenny's hand and didn't tell her to be strong. Tomorrow isn't about who can cry the hardest, it's about making the judge see who has been crossing the line all along. At 1 in the morning, Marcus closed the evidence folder. On the cover are 4 names: Emma Walker, Michael Walker, Jenny Walker, Lily Walker. The following is a civil protective order. I looked at that thick folder, feeling completely calm. Mom and Dad have kept us on the run for so long, tomorrow it's finally their turn to sit in the hot seat and be questioned. On the day of the hearing, we gathered at the foot of the county courthouse steps. Michael wore a slightly wrinkled suit, clutching the testimony papers so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. I didn't comfort him for long. I just reminded him, stick to the facts, and don't explain things for them. This was the first rule I gave him for fighting back. While lining up at the security checkpoint, I spotted Mom and Dad standing by the entrance. Mom wore pearl earrings like she was coming to a church luncheon not to face harassment allegations. When Dad saw me, his face darkened first. He took a step forward, and Marcus stepped directly to my side, the briefcase in his hand more useful than any argument. Mom immediately put on a hurt expression and said softly to me, "Emma, we just want our family back." I didn't stop, because that line had already hurt me too many times. In the courthouse corridor, Jenny tugged at her cuff. That bruise had not completely faded yet, and I knew it would carry more weight than any tears. We sat on one side of the bench, and Mom and Dad sat on the other. Between them were several rows of wooden chairs, and the lies they had spun over 12 years. I set my phone to silent, and the last thing on the screen was still Mom's email from last night. Last chance. She threatened that I would regret it for the rest of my life, but she forgot that emails can also be used as evidence. When the clerk called our case number, Michael visibly froze. I stood up and left first, because this time, I couldn't let him hide behind Mom and Dad's version of the story anymore. After the judge sat down, Marcus first submitted the forced entry report. In the photo, the drawers at Michael's home were pulled open. A document envelope was torn apart, and an empty laptop charger lay on the floor. I saw Dad's jaw tighten for a moment. He used to be best at keeping family matters behind closed doors, but this time, the marks on the door lock had already been put in front of the judge. Next is a gas station surveillance screenshot. A dark Ford SUV was parked on the street corner, and the card receipt showed $30 of gas, with the timestamp right around the break-in. Dad immediately shook his head, saying he was just passing by. The judge looked up and asked him why they had been near their home. He opened his mouth but couldn't come up with a complete answer. Marcus handed over the bouquet card again. The line "We know where you all are" on the white card was enlarged, and Mom's expression finally changed. Wiping away her tears, she said it wasn't a threat, just concern for her family. But I know that someone who is truly worried would not wrap fear in roses and deliver it to the door. As the video of the brick smashing the car window played, the courtroom was very quiet. On screen, the man in the baseball cap ducks his head and slams down, moving so fast it looks like he had rehearsed it long ago. Michael didn't identify anyone, he only said what Marcus had taught him to say. I can't be 100% sure, but that jacket is the same as the one my father often wears. I heard Dad give a cold laugh. The next second, Marcus posts a group photo from his church fundraiser last year. In the photo, Dad is wearing the same jacket and standing beside the barbecue grill. The judge did not comment right away, only writing a single line on the paper. But I saw Mom clutching the tissue tightly. She knew their so-called coincidences were starting to fall short. When it came time for the Facebook evidence, Marcus arranged his mom's posts from over the years by year. Every year on my birthday, she posts photos of candles saying her lost daughter still hasn't come home. I didn't bow my head. Those posts once stole my reputation, but now they prove in return that she had been building a victim persona for a long time. The fundraising page was also projected onto the screen. The goal was $15,000, but the actual amount received was $9,300, with the reason listed as searching for their daughter and treatment costs. The judge asked Mom where the money was spent. Mom wiped the corner of her eye and said it had been too long to remember clearly. Marcus only added one sentence. There was no private investigator invoice. I almost laughed out loud. She played the tragic mother for 12 years, but in the end, she couldn't even produce a single bill proving she had really looked for me. Then Marcus handed the lease records from that year to the judge. The landlord's written testimony was very clear. They ended the lease early, and when they moved out, they didn't leave me a new address. My name was marked separately beside the eviction notice. That piece of paper was colder than any memory, proving I hadn't run away from home, but that they had left me behind. Dad finally spoke, saying things were complicated back then. I was already on the edge of adulthood, and I was rebellious by nature. The judge interrupted him. Had she just turned 18 at the time, with no stable place to live? Dad's mouth twitched. He tried to steer it toward financial hardship, toward family pressure, but the judge focused on only one question. Did you cut off contact? I stood beside the witness stand, my palms sweaty, but my voice didn't shake. I said I've lived in a storage unit, showered at the YMCA, and used library computers to send out resumes. No one in the courtroom interrupted me. I only stated the facts because the facts were already harsh enough. They didn't need me to add emotion. Mom started crying then, saying she thought I would go to social services. The judge looked at her and asked whether they had contacted any agency to confirm she was safe. Mom's tissue stopped in mid-air. In that second, I knew she had cried in the wrong place. What the court wanted was not a performance, but a record. Dad also said they'd been missing me all these years. Marcus immediately handed over 12 years of communication records. No calls, no emails, no birthday cards, until my podcast blew up. I saw Michael lower his head. It wasn't the first time he had heard these things, but seeing them lined up as evidence in court still reopened the wound. When it was the parents' turn to speak, they had no lawyer. Dad stood very straight and opened with a family misunderstanding, saying we had been led astray by online public opinion. I listened as he called harassment concern, breaking down the door a misunderstanding, and threats just words spoken in anger. Turns out it's not that he doesn't know how to apologize, he simply refuses to acknowledge reality. Her mother cried and said she had had heart surgery and could not bear losing her daughter. But from start to finish, she never once said, "Emma, I shouldn't have abandoned you." The judge asked her if she could say exactly what she had done wrong today. Mom froze, only repeating that we had all been hurt. I watched her from the side, and the last bit of old hope in my heart finally died completely. What she wants isn't forgiveness, but to keep being the most pitiful person. Marcus finally handed over that last chance email from last night. The subject is crystal clear. The send time is crystal clear, and the sender is crystal clear. Dad immediately said that wasn't a threat, just a reminder. The judge placed that last chance email on top of the case file and looked directly at Dad. In this court's view, that is not a reminder, it is a threat. Dad's face instantly froze. Mom was still trying to wipe away her tears, but the judge had already brought down the gavel. The 3-year no-contact order took effect in court. As I walked out of the county courthouse, my phone suddenly buzzed. An unknown number sent a photo showing grown-up Lily in a friend's backyard, secretly photographed from behind a fence. There was only one sentence under the photo: "This isn't over yet." My fingers went numb on the spot, because right after being warned by the judge, they dared to turn their sights on Lily. I held the phone up to Michael, and his face was frighteningly pale. The shoulders that had just loosened up felt as if someone had pressed them back down from behind. I didn't let him make calls randomly. I forwarded the screenshots to Marcus first. My judgment is very clear. They are not out of control. They are testing the boundaries of the protection order. Marcus told us on the phone to go straight back to my apartment. He'll bring police officers over and also add this text message to the violation report. When I got back upstairs, Jenny had already brought Lily back. Lily stood in the entryway holding her laptop bag, clearly an adult, yet her face was filled with the sickening disgust of having been watched. 2 police officers were sitting in my living room taking a statement. On the table were photos, text message timestamps, and copies of protection orders, each one pushing Mom and Dad closer to the edge of a crime. The officer said they would trace the number and also notify a patrol car to patrol near my friend's home. I could tell the process was right, but no process can protect against every ring of the doorbell. Jenny sat on the sofa, clutching Lily's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She wasn't weak, she was gritting her teeth and holding herself together, because this time, the one being targeted wasn't her. Michael paced back and forth by the window, repeating the same line over and over. How did they know she was there? That question made everyone in the room fall silent. I asked Lily to open the phone settings. In the location sharing list, that unfamiliar email we had kicked out long ago had somehow popped up again through an old family album link. Lily stared at the screen, her voice growing cold. So they had been looking for vulnerabilities all along. I nodded. This was their habit. If they couldn't win head-on, they would slip through the cracks. At 2 in the morning, I turned off the living room light and sat by the window. At the street corner downstairs, a dark Ford SUV circled my building for the 3rd time. I zoomed in on the license plate with my phone and took a picture of Dad's car parked across the street. He didn't get out of the car, staying just beyond the distance set by the protective order. After I woke him up, Michael stood by the window. He saw that car and clenched his fists, but he didn't rush downstairs because I had already sent the photos to Marcus. Marcus replied quickly, "Keep recording. For now, it does not constitute direct contact." In that moment, I knew the law was a shield, not a wall. After daybreak, Jenny suggested switching to another hotel. Michael wanted to take them away from Columbus, as far away as possible, but as I looked at the evidence board on the table, I suddenly didn't want to run anymore. I stood in the middle of the living room and told them, "They stole my 18, but they cannot steal every tomorrow from us. This time, I'm going to make fear change direction." First, I called Marcus to ask about Ohio's recording rules and safety arrangements in public places. My counterattack wasn't impulsive, it was making them walk right up to a table where everything could be recorded. Marcus was silent for a few seconds, then simply said, "If you insist, I'll be nearby, keep your location on, and send me any threats immediately." This was the boundary I needed. I sent my parents a short email. "Tomorrow at noon, 8th Street Coffee for one last talk. No money, no reconciliation, only boundaries." 3 minutes later, Dad replied, "We'll be there." No crying, no apologies, just 3 words like a challenge to fight, and that made me even more certain they would come. At noon the next day, I arrived early at 8th Street Coffee and sat in a seat toward the back. On the table, there is only an untouched cup of black coffee and a phone that is recording. Mom pushed the door open and came in first, with Dad following behind. When they saw I did not get up, the look on their faces, as if I should have come forward to greet them, instantly fell apart. My first sentence shut them down. "I'm not here to repair the relationship. I'm here to tell you the game is over." Mom's eyes immediately reddened, and she said she just wanted her family to come back. I looked at the tissue in her hand and felt nothing because she only ever cried for herself. Dad lowered his voice and said I had taken the matter to court, making the whole family lose face. I pushed a copy of the protective order straight in front of him. The victim isn't the one who should be ashamed. I opened the phone album, and the first photo was of the broken door after they broke into Michael's house. Dad's eyes flickered and his feigned composure finally cracked. The second one is a gas station surveillance screenshot, with the time, license plate, and card swipe records all there. Mom's hand froze beside the coffee cup, and at last she didn't dare say it was a misunderstanding anymore. The third one is a photo that was secretly taken of Lily. I turned the screen toward them. "If you dare touch her even once, I'll make sure everyone knows you even use your adult granddaughter to threaten people." Dad suddenly looked up, called me ungrateful, and said that without them I wouldn't exist. I let out a laugh because he had used that line for 12 years, and today it finally stopped working. I opened the last folder. Inside are old Facebook posts, threatening emails, forced entry records, a car window report, and a court order, all arranged by date. I told them I had already given the copy to Marcus. The next time they contact Michael, Jenny, Lily, or me, this file will be sent to their siblings, church, neighbors, and employers. Mom's expression finally changed. She wasn't afraid I would get hurt. She was afraid the victim persona she had carefully acted out for all those years would be taken down by me with a single click. Dad gritted his teeth and said, "You wouldn't do that." I looked at him and answered, word by word, "I didn't survive the storage unit and make it to today just to keep being afraid of you." In the corner of the cafe, Marcus sits at another table flipping through a newspaper. When Dad saw him, he immediately swallowed the threat he was about to make. Mom suddenly asked me, "Do you really hate us that much?" It was as if she were waiting for me to break down so she could put herself back in the role of mother. I stood up, leaving the coffee cup on the table. I don't hate any of you.